Now, on this issue of sort of empowering our communities, I always find it a bit strange that this current government has actually withdrawn support for language courses, when in fact the language barrier is one of the key components that's sort of providing a barrier to entry for, in particular, women in the Muslim community, but broad swathes of the Muslim community otherwise. What will you be doing as mayor on this issue? Is there some sort of scheme that you intend to promote that will bring back an educational training programs?
Well, I mean, one of the worst problems of the Tory mayor was when the government came and basically abolished the London Development Agency. That was £400 million a year that was invested in creating jobs, helping English as second language courses and things like that, just wiped out. And it's no good David Cameron talking about the need to everyone to have shared values and a common language if this government is cutting back on English as second language. Everybody in this country should be able to speak English. You can't participate properly if you can't. And therefore you see lots of Bangladeshi women being turned away from the colleges in Tower Hamlets because of the cutbacks in ESOL. I'll try to find resources to expand this, but primarily we've got to batter away at government. Say, don't talk about a country that's at peace with itself if you're excluding people from learning the language here.
Now, on to police and crime. You will have witnessed the recent results of the Stephen Lawrence trials. After 20 years, the murder, in some ways, the killing of an innocent young man is overshadowed by the crudeness of the racism displayed by the Metropolitan Police, which ensured that his family had to wait all this time to see some sort of justice done. There have been calls for another Macpherson-style inquiry in light of recent incidents, including the killing of Mark Duggan or the racist abuse recorded by a young black man while in custody. And I know that you're proposing to take on the mantle of chair of the police authority. Will you be instigating a new independent inquiry into racism of the police force, as some people like Doreen Lawrence have suggested?
We're waiting to see. I mean, the government seemed to indicate last week it would create a new Lawrence inquiry. Then there seems to be some rolling back from this. Clearly, if the government creates one, it's silly for the mayor to duplicate that. But if the government doesn't do that, we will have some form of inquiry or unit inside the Metropolitan Police to actually change these old attitudes. I think when the Tory mayor sacked the previous, 2 ago now, we've now had 3 commissioners of police in 4 years, but when the Tory mayor sacked Sir Ian Blair, the Commissioner of Police, he was sacked for what was so-called the alleged crime of political correctness, which meant challenging racism. And I think it sent a sign throughout the structures of Met this was no longer the mayor's interest or priority. And therefore we've now got, I think it's 18 cases working their way through the system, severe and worrying accusations of racism. The abuse of the power of stop and search is now totally counterproductive, alienating swathes of people. So I will appoint myself as the head of the Mayor's Office of Policing, work closely with the commissioners to change attitudes, restore morale inside the Met. The Met have had the scandals of the corruption of the Murdoch empire reaching right into them, senior officers being forced to go. And I'm also going to fill the 2,100 vacant police posts. But we want to recruit Londoners to that. I want our police force to look more like the composition of London. And in particular, we also want to allocate a police officer to each of our 400 secondary schools. Young people are growing up without any contact with the police until they're in trouble. I'd like young people in school to be able to go to speak to a police officer about something that's concerning them, or threats that they're getting, or someone they know that's selling drugs or carrying a gun. Building those links between police and youth, I think, is very important.
Now, you're talking about engagement with young people. I regularly hear from young people that they feel it's somewhat pointless to try and engage in a political process because politicians are really not interested in them until the elections come round. In particular, the educational maintenance allowance, which was scrapped last year, it was ostensibly brought in to boost the numbers of young people from deprived backgrounds staying on in education. The allowance is widely used, I know, to cover transport costs. I don't know, I'm just going to go on to that in a minute, but the government argued that the Emma, as it was expensive and wasteful, costing over £560 million a year. Are you in agreement with that, or have you got any plans?
No, I've made a commitment that we will reintroduce the education maintenance allowance in London. It was £30 a week maximum for the poorest of our students. It was absolutely crucial, so a student didn't have to make the choice between buying a book they need for their studies or having a meal in the canteen that day. And we shouldn't be making it more difficult for our young people to achieve their academic potential. And so we've sat down with the colleges, we found £30 million they have unused in old pockets of funding, some of it charitable. There's £100 million in similar accounts, London universities. The Mayor of Hackney wants to work with us to restore the education maintenance. So we've got enough funds there. What we need is a structure at City Hall to ensure it's distributed in London. And this Mayor could have done that. I mean, there's no legal power to do this. We're only doing it by consensus, working with colleges and universities and councils. But any Mayor could have done this if they cared enough about our young people.
Finally, on the issue of transport, you were responsible for introducing the congestion charge in London. Some have argued that this created a two-tier system where only the wealthy could travel by car into the centre of the city, and that this was made brutally worse by high public transport costs. In hindsight, was this a fair tax to impose on Londoners, and shouldn't more have been done to subsidise public transport?
Well, it wasn't a tax. It was basically because it only produces about 1 or 2% of the mayor's income. It was done because central London, the traffic speed average was down to 9 miles an hour. Business was saying, you've got to sort this out, or firms are going to start leaving and going to Paris or Frankfurt. And so it was done solely to reduce congestion. And whilst we did that, I actually did reduce the fares in real terms, whilst inflation was roaring away. So when I became mayor, a bus fare in central London was £1. In outer London, it was 70 pence. When I left office 8 years later, after 8 years of inflation, the flat fare for buses across London was 90 pence. Tube fares over those 8 years went up 1.5% in real terms. Now, the contrast now is stunning. The Tory mayor has increased fares 2% above inflation each year. He's committed to doing it for another 4 years. We've already got the highest fares in the world. There is a huge surplus in the fares account, which is why I'm able to say in October we will cut the fares. We'll put that money back in people's pockets. The average Londoner will be £1,000 better off over the next 4 years if I'm mayor than the Tory is re-elected. And that's money they'll spend in local shops, in the local high street. It will help keep the local economy going, help save local jobs. In exactly the same way the Labour leader Ed Miliband wants a cut in VAT to help boost the economy, lift us out this double-dip recession. Cutting the fares, cutting energy prices, restoring the MA, it all puts money back in the pockets of the poorest, and they will spend it. If you put, as this government's done, a tax cut for the richest 1%, they might buy another yacht. It doesn't particularly help the economy here at home.
Now, I know I said finally, but there is another issue that I need to impress on you. That's the issue of engagement with Muslim community organisations and individuals. There seems to have been a policy, I have to say, over the last while, of disengagement with key organisations and key community leaders. I'm not necessarily accusing you during your administration of that. I mean, there were many new initiatives. How important is it that the mayor engages?
Well, I engage regularly with Muslim groups as I engage with Jewish and Hindu and Christian groups. Faith groups are a key way of meeting Londoners. We helped establish the Muslim Safety Forum because Muslims clearly became a target in the aftermath of 9/11. And we had this very interesting hustings between the Tory mayor and myself last week, at which he got quite a roasting because basically until last week he hadn't engaged with the Muslim community at all. It's only when the opinion polls closed and the race became too close to call that the Tories decided the Muslim people were someone that they should talk to. I'll talk to everybody all the time.
Ken Livingstone, on that note, mayoral candidate for London, thank you so much for joining us on Islam Channel.
Thanks very much. Cheers.